grown more in the southern districts, further away from here, but these are long season, quite susceptible to stem rust, and therefore in the system they are a concern because stem rust can steam up on them early. They also harvest them quite late. So these are the ones as an industry we need to be careful of. Leaf rust was also a bit more than we've seen last year than in previous years. There's a few different pathotypes, but mostly they had virulence for LR37. Part of that was that the rust began early on long season weeds such as Morombi, which carry LR37 and YR17. Vulnerable varieties, McKellar's a long season variety, probably again more further south of here, but it's vulnerable to leaf rust. So this is a rust that we need to be aware of, and as I say, more last year, possibly could see more of it this year with significant over-summering on the Green Bridge. Coming to stripe rust, I'm only going to talk about wheat stripe rust, but happy to talk about these other forms of it as well. Comparing last year with previous years, these are just the sample numbers that come into my lab. In the mid-80s, we had some big epidemics. Again, the most recent large epidemic was 2008. The common feature between these two is that it started early and it started in northern New South Wales, southern Queensland. So in 2008, all the rust was coming to me out of Moree, North Star, the Golden Triangle, early, in May, June. So if we start getting rust out of the north, that's usually a bit of a sign that we could be in for a significantly important epidemic period. But this last year, while still very important, most of the action was in this region, in the southern region, into Victoria, southern New South Wales. The pathotypes, there's a whole bunch of pathotypes out there, but these are the significant and most important ones. They're all closely related. They only change by a single step mutation at a time. There could be other mutants in the population, but these are the ones that are important to us because they change on individual resistance genes. See, this one here gave rise to this one. The only difference now is this is virulent or able to cause disease on the Jackie triticale. Here, Jackie was protected. Now it's quite virulent and Jackie triticale is vulnerable. So in this region, to the south and to the east, long season triticales again have the potential to build up rust to significant levels early in the season and so threaten our main season cropping. A couple of years ago, 2008, end of the year, a lot of epidemic. The epidemic was dominated by this pathotype, single step change, and YR27 is now virulent. This rust, identical to this rust, the only difference is YR27. So the YR27 carrying wheats were going to change to some extent, varying extents, to this particular pathotype. Wagon particularly, Morinda, one or two others. Hardly ever saw this rust though. So Wagon was still performing really well, Morinda still performing really well because this rust didn't survive, didn't cause any problems in farming areas. So 2009, didn't see it at all. Last year saw just one or two of these isolates. In contrast, virulence for Y17 arose in 2006, started low, build up to last year. It was almost a dominant, it was about half of the whole population. It was the dominant rust last year. Because this, I'm presuming that because this was so high in the pathogen population, at the end of the year, it popped this thing out. Single step mutation, virulence for YR27. This rust does really concern me. It combines virulence for 17, which is in a lot of our varieties, YR27 in a shorter group of varieties, but nevertheless, varieties, as I mentioned earlier, Wagon, is likely to be as vulnerable to this as this one was. So I'm predicting that if Wagon's got any sort of acreage out there, it's one to watch. Anything with YR17 is going to be equally as vulnerable to this as it is to the older one. So it's only at low levels at the moment. It's only at 4% of the pathogen population. Haven't seen it before. But notice how these things can change. So the WA17, with adaptation onto YR17 varieties, has just increased quite rapidly to last year. It's just on 50% of the pathogen population. Jackie pathotype was very dominant, now dropping away as this one's sort of overtaken it. So the dynamics will change from year to year depending on varieties, particularly depending on what's survived over summer and where, and what early start it gets. So we've got every opportunity for early infection this year. We've got green bridging everywhere. The epidemic potential is certainly there, so we need to think carefully about variety choice, pre-season management, and then foliar spray budgeting into the coming season. Variety responses, I'm not going to go through a lot of detail, it's in the guides. Just to point out a couple of things in this region. Gregory, good for stripe rust. It does respond to an early spray, a lot of fungicide, A lot of rust can get onto the cropping phase early, from growth stage 32 and earlier, and so an early fungicide spray has been helpful. I would suggest you never need a spray after that for Gregory. I'm really happy with that as a variety. Responds really nicely as the plants grow. But if you do spray early, you're going to get a double effect on protecting yellow spot if you're putting Gregory into a stubble situation with inoculum load. Greg's going to talk more about that in a minute. Ventura, we know, is vulnerable. We need to protect it. We need to protect it from early. I, again, would like to see seed protection onto these varieties, and particularly the early planted ones. MRMS, wedge tail performs well if it's protected early, if it's grazed heavily early. Again, with early season protection, you've got to just be careful and be aware of withholding periods before you put the cattle or the sheep in. Be aware of some of the other points of vulnerability to some of the other diseases as well. Management options at sowing, a whole range of options here. Seed dressings, tridimenol has good efficacy across the septorias, the smuts and bunts and the rust. The issue there to be careful of is it does shorten the coleoptile, so you need good quality seed placed well into the seed bed. So be careful that we don't get into situations of poor emergence, because this has a reputation of shortening the coleoptile. Liquid applications with seed, on fertiliser, higher rates, more expensive. Some of these do and don't do a job on smuts, so be careful of your chemical choice. Very inexpensive, tridemifon mixed in with a fertiliser. $4 a hectare, gives really good protection, but of course doesn't do a job on smuts and bunts. But this has been, I think, now widely used, particularly in the more western region, protecting the crops as these do, sometimes right through to the flag leaf, giving you another flexibility in management as to whether the season goes and whether to decide to put another fungicide spray on or not. Fungicides, again, a range of price and product. Now, don't hold me to this. You folks know better than I what some of these prices are, and they're likely to be varying at any time during the season. But again, notice that some do and some don't do a job on the other diseases. So if you're going into Gregory to give a double effect on yellow spot as well as stripe rust, these are your chemicals. These ones won't do a job on yellow spot. So just be aware of those chemical choices. Some of the product mixes, somewhat more expensive, but some of them doing a really good job and doing a longer season protection. I was going to make a comment. Oh, and epoxyconazole, yeah, sorry. Doesn't do a job on yellow spot, but really good curative and really good protection. But just be aware that some of these spectrum ranges in their disease targets. And finally, just remain connected during the year. If you send me a sample, what I've been trying to do is send you a receipt email saying, yes, we've received it, yes, it is stripe rust, and then giving you an email back as soon as I get some information in on what strain or pathotype it is. So that two-way flow of information has certainly been helpful for me, hopefully also helpful for you. And then during the year, we put out a serial rust report. If you don't get that directly, I'm happy to put you on the email for that. Just send me a message. If you want to pull those down off the website, the most recent and the most past ones are always available there. So I like to think communication with us and the Rust Group in Sydney is helpful, and we certainly have a positive relationship with you folks in the field, and it keeps us very much in touch.
Just a question on the origin of the new YR1727 strain.
Yep.
Does that come through the WA17 strain, or is it the old YR17?
WA17 strain, which is what I just sometimes shorten it out to just the 17 strain.
The question just relates to the old YR17 strain, been around for a long time, and nowhere near as virulent. That was just a...
good question, good observation. We had virulence for YR17 back in the mid-90s, but it never caused much of a problem on things other than the very vulnerable soft weeds like Qual 2000, one or two other varieties that just had 17 and nothing else. And that old version of YR17 could get attached onto that. But yeah, it was basically not very aggressive, didn't have a lot of virulence spectrum, and was only very low level to the population. In contrast, the WA17 pathotype was just taken off because it's got aggressiveness, adaptability, and well liked by the YR17 varieties.
Just a quick comment on Livingston as a variety and its the rust that's attacking it. I mean, what's your thoughts on it at this stage?
Yeah, well, look, it's I can't really tell you what Livingston's going to do. This past year we caught disease off, this new pathotype came only off Livingston, first point. Second point, I got about 10 or 12 samples, so 4% of the pathogen population in year one. So it does tell me it's likely to survive. Don't know whether it will or not, but it's likely to survive. Third point, we found it from Grenfell, Young through to Gilgandra in a fairly scattered but in a lens sort of area. New South Wales, nowhere else, just central west, southern New South Wales. And the people I get, every time I got a sample, I'd send the result back and then I'd phone them and say, what did it look like? And all I can tell you there is it looks like it's going to be something like MRMS, but I would never put that up here or put it up because I've got no data, okay? No comparative data. But I'd say if you've got Livingston in your system, keep a close eye on it. And I think it'd be cautious, it'd be wise to be cautious on it. In other words, if you see rust in Livingston, send me a sample, but get some spray happening.
We might get straight into it because I ran out of time at the previous presentation. I'll just start with a map of Uruguay, mainly because this is the second time I've been to Young in the past 3 months. And if you look on the map up here, you'll see that there's a town on the western side of Uruguay, spelled Y-O-U-N-G, pronounced Jung. And we actually went and visited trials up there. I took a photo and it could be anywhere in Australia. It's quite flat, undulating country, and the backdrop of eucalypts are all over the place. It sort of makes you feel like home when you're over there. But I'm not here to do a geography lesson. I'm here to actually talk yellow spot and wheat. In particular, trying to control the disease in wheat on wheat systems. I'll begin by saying I believe we're pushing the limits. And when we go through and talk biology of this fungus, you'll understand why. Reduced and zero tillage has been a wonderful boost to agriculture production in Australia, mainly through the benefits of moisture conservation and soil conservation. And you see those benefits reflected most in dry years by virtue of the extra soil moisture in the profile. But I also believe because of the lower disease incidence you get in those years, because you don't have the in-crop rainfall, you have less disease, so your varieties are much better equipped to be able to express the yield potential. One thing that stubble retention has done is it's kept a lot of pathologists in work because it's brought in a whole new suite of diseases, one of which is yellow spotted wheat, and it was the one that sort of emerged earliest of most of the stubble-borne diseases that are now quite common in our farming systems. There is one thing I would like to make you familiar with, is that if you do have low levels of yellow spot in a growing crop, that does not necessarily mean that the stubbles resulting from that crop are going to have low inoculant potential. I think it depends a lot on what happens in the off-season, and I say think because I don't have proof of this, but being involved with this disease over a long period of time, it's quite happy whether it's a pathogen or a saprophyte, whether it's attacking living hosts or whether it's living in the straw. And when yellow spot affects a growing plant, it penetrates the stalks, the leaves, and when that crop actually matures, the fungus is actually living in that straw. You add water and it will keep developing. So from a relatively low level of inoculum in the growing crop, you can end up with a reasonably high inoculant potential in the stubble. Just a bit of background, yellow spot was once a minor disease in the days when we cultivated and when we finished harvest by burning the stubble. It was virtually a non-entity. But around the 1970s there was this great change that came upon Australian agriculture, reduced tillage systems, there were wheat varieties brought in from the CIMMET program that offered us early maturity, high yields, and they were intercrossed a lot with Australian varieties, and actually quite a bit of that CIMMET material was quite susceptible to yellow spot. Around that same time, we had a sequence of quite favourable years. And I say favourable because they were good for growing wheat, but also good for developing yellow spot, with frequent wet periods and good total rainfalls, particularly in the north where I'm from. Just to recap on the life cycle of yellow spot, you have infected stubble. You wet that stubble for a period of time, it develops these little black fruiting bodies, and actually under magnification they look like miniature volcanoes with little spines out the top of them. Each one of those, pseudothecia we call them, carries a couple of hundred probably, ascospores, the sexual spores, these here. So under wet conditions they're forcibly ejected out of the little mini volcano. They have been measured reaching a height of 8.9 centimetres. but it gets them into the air movement, then they're carried on to the emerging crop, and the disease establishes there. It's seen first as little black dots where the infection occurs, but over time this actually grows and expands, and you end up with a symptom, you end up with a symptom similar to this, where you have a light brown to tan centre, yellow halos around the outside, and you get enough of those in a leaf, they'll just kill the leaf completely. As soon as you have dead tissue on a growing plant, given more wet conditions, you're going to get spores produced, and the spores produced at this stage are actually what we call conidia. Completely different shape. They're long and thin compared to little short squat ones you get that are produced out of these things over here. These spores actually are produced on little short conidiophores, we call them, and when humidity drops, they're actually snapped off from these conidiophores into the air and either blown around or shifted around to infect new tissue. And it's these spores that actually promulgate the disease from leaf to leaf, plant to plant, and from crop to crop. And they're actually produced in bucket loads under warm, wet conditions. Something that really promotes yellow spot we've found in the past is a lot of grey weather, frequent wet periods, warm temperatures. So all those things make a yellow spot go crazy. Stubble is integral, or the amount of infective stubble is integral to the amount of yellow spot you're going to get in the growing crop. And work we did way back in 1983 clearly demonstrated that even at very low levels you can get infection. This was about 170 kilos per hectare dry matter of stubble. So that's a piece of straw there and a piece of straw there. Very light amount of stubble. This one here was 670 kilos per hectare, not even a tonne per hectare. The one out here was about 3.3 tonne. It would have been nice to have a couple of more points there, but just the logistics didn't allow that. But it clearly shows that early infection is almost directly related to the amount of stubble that's applied to the crop. So, come up here to about 2 tonne, you can extrapolate, you get about 50 lesions on a leaf too from that initial infection. More importantly, the amount of stubble in those plots actually dictated the amount of yield loss that we measured. So where we had that very low 170 kilos per hectare, we measured a 22% loss in yield. Where we had the 670, about 32%, and where we had the high level virtually 42%. Now I should qualify this work in saying that we actually used the variety banks for a lot of this work, outmoded now, but it was very good for our purposes because it was very susceptible. So from that work we know that by reducing the amount of infective stubble is probably the first step in trying to control this disease. How you do it, I'll leave to your imagination. But there are a few options that we could implement. I want to talk now about resistant varieties because I've had a bit of experience at looking at varieties under similar epidemic conditions. I know in this region last year that Gregory caused a lot of problems. And going through the variety guides, Gregory's ranked at MS2S. I see Hartog, particularly in our northern guides, is also ranked as MS2S. I disagree with the rankings for both those. I think they both should be susceptible. However, just to demonstrate my point, when we were working with yellow spot, we looked at the yield loss in Hartog and Banks under exactly the same epidemic conditions. So a trial situation, we carted disease stubble on, we control the disease, which is this maroon bar. In this one here, we actually applied a single propiconazole spray at 500 ml per hectare, and they're the comparative results. So where we controlled the disease in Hartog, we ended up with a 58% increase in yield. We were able to control it in Banks, 146% increase in yield. A single foliar application around that growth stage 39 gave us a 29% boost in yield, and in Banks, a 51% boost in yield. So therefore you would virtually assume if you had something down this end of the spectrum, in the moderately resistant to resistant category, your results should even look flasher. And the next slide hopefully demonstrates that. The variety Leichhardt was developed of a cross between Hartog, or a back cross between Hartog and a line CMT3 that came out of Brazil with very good yellow spot resistance. It was released and grown in, I'd say, minor acreages in South Queensland. In 1998, we had a very severe epidemic in the north, of yellow spot. And by summing up the yields, or summarising the yields, of 15 stage 3 trial sites across South Queensland, you get a pretty good grasp of just how beneficial resistant varieties can be. Leichhardt is the maroon one, and as you can see, at all sites, it was well above the yields of Hartog. And I think the differences range from about 16% at Roma to about 106% down here at Billa West. But on average, the resistance returned a 40 to 70% increase in yield in that particular year. Now again, that was a severe epidemic. You're not going to see that in all situations, but they're the sorts of losses that are incurred, and they're the sorts of benefits you can engender by actually developing resistant varieties. And there's some very good resistant material out there. Our people now are using synthetic hexaploids as sources of resistance, and I believe some of the material we have coming through the pre-breeding stuff is very resistant. So there's two strategies. We can either reduce stubble, we can grow resistant varieties. The other thing I want to talk about is fungicides. And a couple of the slides we've put up already indicate that they can be effective. I just want to put up one slide to indicate the losses that yellow spot can cause. This was in the variety sun state, which we'd rank as, I think it's in the guides as S for susceptible, but it's a bit worse than that. It's S to VS. And it incurred a yield loss of about, we increased yield by 46% by keeping the disease at bay with several sprays of propiconazole, foliar. But where we applied single sprays, we were still getting a very positive benefit of the application of fungicides. 18% where we used 250 ml per hectare of till. 500 ml gave us a 42% increase in yield from the single application. And the foliar applications are sort of in the same ballpark, maybe not quite as good as that one there. But when you put economics to this, on today's prices, where we've actually estimated that the costs of tilt and foliar, they're about, par for the course currently, $8.50 per hectare application, and factor in that where we had full disease, that was downgraded to feed because of the high screenings, we ended up with a net benefit of about $850 per hectare. So the dollars say it's well worthwhile. Even if you don't go for the best option, 600, it's very attractive. But it's important that those fungicides are applied correctly. And just a few guidelines on that application. A lot of this work I did with yellow spot was done in the times when fungicides were expensive. They've come back in price enormously, and a lot of this stuff was based around a one-hit strategy. You could probably do more if you wanted to. But it's that growth stage 39 that remains the money spray. If you want to go in earlier, I have no objections. You'll probably get a bit of a benefit from it, but you've really got to protect that tissue. Applying fungicides too early is much better than applying too late. I've always been very reluctant to say to farmers, go and spray your crop with fungicide, because it was expensive. It's not quite that way these days, and the earlier slide showed just how beneficial it can be. Timing is more important than product, whether it's foliar or propiconazole, some of the newer generation ones, Emistar Extra, they all offer a very good benefit. So just do your sums and you'll work out what you should or could use. I guess the main concern is they're not lasting protection. You probably get 3 to 5 weeks depending on rate. You might even be able to bump it up to 6 weeks in some situations, but that's the length of protection you're going to get from one spray. So basically economics dictate your spray strategy. And I put this image in here. I don't know whether you can see the little yellow spots in the leaves there. Definitely past growth stage 39, and I think it's definitely past the perfect time to put your fungicide on, but it's not too late. And I think too many of us are driven by application to growth stage rather than application to epidemic development. It's a bit of a juggling act between the two. You must have your flag out, you must try to keep your flag clean, but in some years that might even exceed growth stage 39. You might be coming into flowering or something like that before you have to apply your fungicide. Just to guide those decisions, I'll wind it up soon. We did work also looking at the different durations or epidemics at different growth stages to try to measure the effect of epidemics at different times through the year. Where we had banks heavily diseased up to growth stage 31, in banks again we could demonstrate a 12.5% yield loss. Where we had epidemics going from growth stage 31 right through the life of the crop, we lost 35% yield, and where we had full disease throughout the season, we lost 48% yield. And I swear on the good book that none of that is fudged. They're true results from a publication, and we did get them, but they just add up so well, you don't repeat experiments like that, you walk away from them, job done. So, if we're going to control wheat on wheat systems, first thing I'll say, it's going to be a really big challenge because it's just tailor-made for yellow spot to increase. We're really at the mercy of the environment, just how much disease will develop in a crop. But I can offer you two options. Number one, don't. Avoid wheat on wheat on wheat. I find a lot of these stubble-borne diseases, if you really want to run the gauntlet, you'll probably get away with 2 successive crops. But you push to a third, you're really challenging the limits. The other thing you can do is rotate to non-host crops. You people down here have canola, some legumes, you have barley, you have oats. All those are non-hosts. So if you've got heavily infected wheat straw, go into those paddocks with one of those other options. The other thing is, if you are planting wheat on wheat, just be prepared. Be prepared to hit it with everything that is available to you. Try to reduce your inoculum load. Sow resistant varieties where they're available, and be prepared to apply fungicide. It means good crop monitoring, having a knowledge of what products to use, and applying them at the right growth stage.
When does the stubble continue to sporulate right through the growing season once you've sown into it? And the other part of the question is, we noticed this year we did the right thing. We had wheat in 08, 09 was canola. We still had wheat residue come through because of the dry season, and we still got significant epidemics of yellow leaf spot.
So your wheat stubble was standing with your canola stubble?
Yep, sown into it.
Yep, okay. First point is, they probably do produce ascospores for an extended period in the season, but once your crop sort of grows, a lot of that release just goes nowhere. Hits sort of bottoms of leaves, canopy sort of covers over it. Your wheat stubble in canola stubble, wheat will remain infective for at least a couple of seasons, provided it's gone through dry periods. I think it's moisture that makes them sort of shed their spore load and develop to produce the ascospores. So if you've gone through dry summers, then they'll certainly, in dry winters, they'll certainly remain infective for at least 2 years. Was there another question? No, I think that sums it up, Peter. It's probably what happens. We find with yellow spot that most of that initial infection actually comes from those little black fruiting bodies. With some of the other stubble diseases, particularly the net blotches in barley, they seem to be able to produce those conidia directly out of the straw. There seems to be a bit of a difference on, the bit of looking at them that we've done.
Greg, John Sykes from Albury. Last year we had a pretty severe infection with a reasonably wet winter, and I actually thought that the yellow leaf spot was killing tillers at about 4 to 5 leaf stage. I know that the normal thing is not to spray at that stage, but if you saw that effect, would you spray?
Quick answer is no. Yeah, I know it can look terrible, and we've seen that happen up in the north as well, where you end up just with the primary tiller left. A lot of the subsidiary tillers have been killed off by yellow spot. But given dry weather, or if the disease doesn't progress, it's amazing how well that comes back. And those figures I put up there, where we had severe disease, it still only knocked about 12.5% off your crop potential prior to growth stage 31. So as I said, it's an economic decision. If you think you can recoup that 12.5% of potential yield by going in early, I have no problem with you doing it. I was sitting here while Cole gave his talk trying to think what the big difference was between spraying early for stripe rust and spraying early for yellow spot control. and this is my thoughts, no scientific backup whatsoever, but you spray stripe rust early, you virtually kill that infection pretty well, and for it to become a threat again by self-propagation, it's virtually got to have spores coming in, reinfecting and resporulating. With yellow spot, you spray it, you virtually don't kill the yellow spot. All you're doing is arresting future development, and as soon as that fungicide wears off, I'm pretty sure those lesions just go straight into spore production again. So they don't have to go through that new infection phase. And I think that's the big difference between trying to hold up yellow spot and hold up stripe rust. That's only my opinion.